I was 65 when my world cracked open. My name is Ruth M. Talbot, and I'd spent my life in a small Texas town where the sun bakes the earth and love is supposed to hold stronger than debt. It started with a phone call at 12:08 a.m., yanking me from a shallow sleep. My son's voice trembled through the line, not the steady tone of the man he'd become, but the scared, gasping cry of the boy I'd rocked through sleepless nights. "Mom, please," he sobbed. "If you don't help me, I'll die. I lost everything in crypto, took a second mortgage on the house. I owe $80,000 and they're coming for it next week. Samantha doesn't even know, I'm ruined." My heart pounded, louder than his panic. This was my only child, the baby I'd carried through a sweltering summer, the boy I'd raised with a broken fan and prayers when money was tight. I sat on the edge of my bed, the lamp casting shadows on the chipped dresser, a framed photo of his graduation glinting in the light. "How much?" I asked, my voice flat with fear. 80,000, he whispered like it was a sin. I exhaled, staring at my crocheted blanket, my modest life barely worth half that number. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, an old coffee mug in hand, his debt heavy on my shoulders. By dawn I'd made my choice. I drove to the bank, hands trembling, purse stuffed with paperwork. The loan officer, a woman with sharp eyes, listened as I said I needed every dollar I had. My house, my pension, my savings, all liquid now. "This puts you at risk," she warned, glancing at my modest accounts. "Your retirement, your home." I nodded. "He's my son." It took 2 weeks to pull it together. I sold my house to a private buyer, moved into a rental apartment near the church, and drained my savings and retirement fund. When I held the $80,000 cashier's check, it felt like a lifeline and a noose. I called my son to meet me at the bank. He was there, eyes red, hair a mess, hugging me like a drowning man. "I owe you my life," he said, voice breaking. "We processed the payment, cleared his debt, saved his house. You'll stay with us, right?" he asked as we walked to the car. "It's only fair." I nodded, tired but hopeful, believing this was the moment love would finally meet gratitude. He opened the car door for me, promising, "I'll take care of you now, Mom." I believed him because when your child begs with tears, you don't count the cost, you open your arms. But 6 months later, that love soured into silence, then resentment. He'd insisted I move in, saying it'd save me money, that I shouldn't be alone in my tiny apartment. I hesitated, cherishing my independence, my porch garden, my quiet mornings, but I wanted to believe this was his way of thanking me, of being the son I'd raised. The first month was warm, Sunday bread baking, picking up the grandkids from school, folding laundry when Samantha was busy. My son kissed my cheek before work. The kids loved having me, but by the 3rd month, the warmth faded. Samantha sighed when I entered rooms. The grandkids were told not to bother me. My son stayed late at work, barely speaking when he was home. My tea kettle vanished from the kitchen. My soap was replaced with hers. I overheard Samantha on the phone. "It's like living with a shadow. She's always there." I said nothing, swallowing the hurt like I always did. Then came the dinner that broke me. I'd made lasagna, his favorite, from scratch, the way I did for his birthdays from age 8 to 21. The table was set, the dish warm, but Samantha picked at her plate. The kids were silent. My son scrolled his phone. Without looking at me, Samantha said, "This house feels cramped. Maybe it's time we talk about long-term arrangements. If Mom could find another place, even temporarily, it'd help everyone breathe." The words landed like a velvet slap. I froze, fork mid-air, waiting for my son to say something, anything. He didn't. He kept scrolling. I set my fork down, forced a smile. "I suppose I can look into options," I said, my voice thin. Samantha nodded, satisfied. That night, I barely slept, the sting of their silence louder than any shout. A week later, I came home from the grocery store to find the front door locked, my key useless. I rang the bell, knocked, texted, called nothing. I sat on the porch, lasagna pan still in my bag, until my son's car pulled up. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, surprised. "I live here," I said, confused. Samantha stepped out, arms crossed. "We changed the locks for safety," she said. "The kids." My son cut in, avoiding my eyes. "It's better this way. You need your own space. You being here, it's too much." I stared, stunned. "I paid your debt," I said, voice trembling. "I sold my house." His face twisted. Nobody asked you to. You expect us to babysit you forever. You're a leech, Mom. Just go. Just die. I don't give a shit. He walked inside, Samantha closing the door. I stood there, locked out, 2 grocery bags at my feet, and laughed a bitter, quiet sound. They thought they'd broken me, but I whispered to myself, all right, Ruth, time to remember who owns what. What do you do when your son calls you a leech and tells you to die after you gave up everything to save him? I'd sold my house, drained my savings, and paid off his $80,000 debt, only to be locked out of his home with nothing but grocery bags and a broken heart. But I wasn't just a mother who'd been cast aside. I held the key to their house, my name on the loan they thought was theirs. Would I let their cruelty stand, or would I pull the thread that unraveled their world? If you're gripped by this Texas tale, hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from. Let's see what happens next. I left that porch in a cab, the lasagna pan still heavy in my bag, my son's words, just die, I don't give a shit, burning hotter than the Texas sun. At 65, I'd lost my home, my savings, and the boy I'd raised, but I wasn't broken, I was awake. The cab dropped me at a narrow street near the old church I used to attend, where a retired priest's house had been turned into modest rentals. The landlord, a widow named Eileen, took one look at me and said, "You've been through something, haven't you?" I nodded, too tired to explain. She handed me a key to a 1-bedroom unit, no view, just a brick wall outside the window but clean and mine. I unpacked slowly, folding clothes into drawers that didn't belong to me, setting old photos on a windowsill. Each night, I made tea in a chipped mug and stared at the ceiling, not crying, not bitter, just remembering. No one called, not my son, not Samantha, not even the grandkids. For the first time since I was a girl, I felt alone. But alone isn't the same as helpless, and that's where they were wrong. I hadn't handed over $80,000 without protecting myself. When I paid off my son's debt, I'd insisted on one thing at the bank, a detail no one questioned in their desperation. I wasn't just a cosigner, I was the principal borrower on the loan, my name tied to their house as collateral. They thought I'd given them a blank check, but I'd read every line of the fine print. That night, in my quiet apartment, I pulled a folder from my suitcase, spreading the documents across the floor like a map of my sacrifice. There it was, borrower Ruth M. Talbot, secured property, 159 Wisteria Lane, lien holder First Texas Savings, my name, my power, tucked into legal language they'd never bothered to read. I sipped lukewarm tea, the papers glowing under the dim lamp. They wanted me gone, called me a leech, but paper remembers what people forget. I whispered to the silence, they want me dead, fine, let's see what a ghost can do. The house they lived in wasn't just a home, it was my lifeline. When I sold my own place to cover their debt, I'd given up the small ranch house where I'd raised my son, where we'd laughed over burnt pancakes and patched holes in the drywall together. I'd worked as a motel cleaner, a grocery clerk, anything to keep us afloat when his father left us. I'd skipped meals to buy his school supplies, stayed up late sewing his Halloween costumes, never asking for a thank you. When he called that night, begging for help, I didn't hesitate, even though it meant dismantling my life. I thought it was what mothers do, open their arms, no matter the cost. But when Samantha sighed at my presence, when my son scrolled his phone instead of defending me, when they changed the locks and told me to disappear, they didn't just betray me, they erased every sacrifice I'd made. I'd kept those documents though, every receipt of my love, locked in a folder I hadn't touched until now. I didn't act right away. I spent my days volunteering at the church food pantry, sorting cans, folding clothes, handing out hot meals to folks most people ignored. Dolores, who slept under the bridge with her Bible in a Ziploc bag, told me stories of her kids who never called. Kenny, who'd lost his job and wife, cracked jokes to keep the gloom at bay. I listened, mopped floors, patched jackets, and kept my story quiet. Not because I was ashamed, but because it wasn't unique. We were all discarded in some way, told we were too much or not enough. But in that pantry, I learned silence isn't weakness, it's clarity, sharpening your vision of what matters. I wasn't plotting revenge, I was preparing, letting the truth settle in my bones like the Texas dust outside. One crisp October morning, Eileen knocked, holding the community newspaper. "Isn't this your son?" she asked, pointing to a photo. There he was, smiling beside Samantha in front of a commercial lot, the headline boasting, "Local couple launches dream cafe." They'd listed their house, my house, to fund it. I folded the paper, my hands steady. 3 days later, my phone rang, an unknown number, but I knew. I let it go to voicemail, then it rang again and again. On the 4th call, I answered. "Mom," my son said, voice shaky, "we need to talk. The bank says we can't sell the house without your signature. You're the primary on the loan." I waited, letting his words hang. "Why would you need me?" I asked. "I thought I was a leech." He stumbled. "I didn't mean it. It's just paperwork. Please sign it." I smiled, soft as rain. "You meant every word, son. Words don't fall out by accident." He was crying now, but I didn't soften. "Say it again," I said. A pause, then faintly, "I owe you everything." I nodded to myself. "Now I can hear you." I hung up, not promising anything. They thought they'd won, but they'd forgotten the fine print. I wasn't just a mother they'd locked out. I was the woman who held their future, and I was done being invisible. What happens when the son who called you a leech realizes you hold the keys to his world? I'd given my son everything, my house, my savings, my future, to clear his $80,000 debt, only to be locked out and told to just die. But I wasn't just a discarded mother. My name was on the loan, the deed, the truth they'd ignored. Now they needed my signature to save their dream, and I held a demand for $100,000 principal plus interest. Would I bend to their tears, or would I let the law teach the lesson they never learned? If this Texas tale has you hooked, smash that subscribe button and drop a comment with where you're watching from. Let's see how this showdown unfolds. I sat in my small apartment, the Texas sun filtering through thin curtains, when the knock came, a soft, hesitant tap, like they weren't sure they belonged here. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I opened the door to find my son and Samantha, shadows in the hallway of my modest rental. Samantha's mascara was smudged, her lips trembling. My son stood behind her, hands jammed in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor like a guilty child. "Hi, Miss Ruth," Samantha said, her voice small, a title she'd never used before. I didn't smile. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They shuffled into my one-bedroom unit, awkward, their knees brushing the small kitchen table where 2 cups of tea sat cold. I'd set them out, not because I expected them, but because some part of me knew this moment was coming. The air smelled faintly of old lemons, the ceiling fan squeaked above us, but this space was mine, paid for with truth. They sat, silent, like guests in a stranger's home, and I let the quiet stretch, a third guest heavier than words. Samantha broke first, her voice brittle. "We messed up," she said, tears tracing lines through her makeup. "We didn't mean to hurt you. Things got stressful and God, we were horrible." My son said nothing, his eyes locked on a crack in the tile floor. I waited, not rushing their guilt. They'd rushed my exit. I could let them sit in this. "The cafe was our dream," Samantha went on, her words tumbling fast. "We invested everything, cards, loans. We thought selling the house would fund it, but the bank says we can't without you. The lien, your name." Her voice cracked. Still my son was silent, as if the floor held answers he'd never find. I turned to him. "Anything to add?" He shook his head, shoulders slumped. I stood, walked to the kitchen drawer, and pulled out my folder, thick, tied with a blue ribbon, like the ones for birth certificates or marriage licenses. I placed it on the table, their eyes following like it might bite. "This," I said, opening it, "is the loan agreement. This is the mortgage deed. This is the lien confirmation from First Texas Savings. And this," I slid out a notarized page, "is the repayment demand. $100,000 principal plus 12% interest, standard, nothing personal." Samantha gasped, the air leaving her like a punctured tire. My son looked up, his face pale as if I'd slapped him instead. "You can't be serious," Samantha whispered. "I am," I said, my voice calm as a Texas dusk. "You borrowed from me. You locked me out of the house I helped save. You called me a leech. If you want your house free and clear, you pay what you owe." Samantha's voice rose, frantic. "We don't have that money. We've spent everything. Equipment, furniture, our future's tied to that house." I nodded, folding my hands. "Then I'll sell it." Her eyes widened, stunned. But it's our home. No, I corrected, steady as stone. It was never yours. It was my loan, my security, my name. You gambled with something you didn't own. My son finally spoke, his voice low, broken. Mom, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I looked at him, really looked, searching for the boy who'd held my hand at the county fair, who'd made me a sign when I passed my driving test at 60. My mom can drive, so watch out, Texas. I didn't see him, only a man who'd forgotten where he came from. You meant it, I said, not cruelly, just true. You told me to die. Words don't slip out like that. They come from somewhere. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Samantha reached for him, but he didn't move. I sipped my cold tea, letting them feel the weight of a closed door, the way I'd felt on their porch, grocery bags in hand, nowhere to go. We thought you'd sign, Samantha said, almost to herself. We thought it was just paperwork. I leaned forward. I tried talking to you. Every sigh, every eye roll, every time you treated me like furniture, I spoke. You didn't listen. They left in silence, no promises made, no tea touched. I sat at my table, the folder still open, my son's apology echoing, but not softening me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted them to understand. That house wasn't just walls, it was my sacrifice. I'd sold my own home, a small ranch where I'd raised him, where we'd laughed over lumpy oatmeal, where I'd sewn his costumes by lamplight. I'd worked motel jobs, scrubbed floors, counted pennies to keep him fed. When he begged for help, I gave it all, thinking love would be enough. But they'd turned my love into a burden, my presence into a shadow. Now they needed me, not for love but for my name on their deed. I closed the folder, the papers whispering my power. They thought I'd fade away, but I was the lien holder, the one they'd forgotten to fear. Outside, the Texas sky burned gold, and I felt something shift. Not anger, but clarity. I wasn't just a mother scorned, I was a woman who remembered, and that memory was sharper than any knife. How do you teach a son who called you a leech that love comes with a price? I'd given my son my house, my savings, my everything to clear his $80,000 debt, only to be locked out and told to just die. My name was on their loan, their deed, and I demanded $100,000 principal plus interest. They begged for mercy, but I held the power to sell their house, the one I'd saved. Would I give them another chance, or would I let the Lord deliver the lesson they'd never forget? If this Texas saga's got you on edge, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from. Let's see how this plays out. The Texas sun was low, painting my apartment's thin curtains gold when I made my choice. My son and Samantha had left my place days ago, their apologies heavy but hollow, their plea for time ringing in my ears. They couldn't raise $100,000, not in 30 days, not with their cafe dreams eating every dime. I sat at my kitchen table, the folder of documents open, my tea cold in its chipped mug. The lien confirmation stared back. Ruth M. Talbot, principal borrower, secured property at 1159 Wisteria Lane. They'd gambled with a house they didn't own, thinking I'd sign away my rights out of love. But love doesn't mean erasing yourself, and at 65 I was done shrinking. I called the bank, my voice steady. I'd like to file a petition to initiate the sale of the property, I said. The clerk paused, then confirmed my rights as lien holder. We'll start the process, Miss Talbot, she said. I hung up, not with joy, but with a quiet resolve. They'd locked me out, now I'd lock them out of their dream. The house wasn't just a building, it was my sacrifice. I'd sold my own home, a small ranch where I'd raised my son, where we'd danced to radio tunes in the kitchen, where I'd stayed up late sewing his school clothes. I'd worked motel jobs, scrubbed toilets, skipped meals to buy his books, all to give him a life better than mine. When he called, begging for help with his $80,000 debt, I didn't hesitate, even if it meant dismantling my world. I thought it was what mothers do, give everything, no questions asked. But when Samantha sighed at my presence, when my son told me to die, they didn't just betray me, they spat on every penny I'd bled for. I'd insisted on being the principal borrower, a quiet move they'd overlooked in their panic. That choice, tucked into the fine print, was my shield now. I wasn't cruel, but I was clear, they'd pay what they owed, or lose what they'd taken for granted. I didn't act out of spite. I spent my days at the church pantry, sorting cans, mopping floors, listening to folks like Dolores, who carried her Bible in a Ziploc bag, and Kenny, whose jokes hid a broken heart. They reminded me that pain wasn't unique, that being discarded didn't mean you were done. I kept my story quiet, not out of shame, but because it was still unfolding. I wasn't plotting revenge, I was guarding my dignity, something I'd let slip too long. 30 days passed, and no payment came, no miracle arrived, so I followed through. The bank moved fast, filing the necessary papers. The courthouse was cold, the judge's eyes kind but firm as he reviewed the documents. "Are you certain, Miss Talbot?" he asked, glancing at my steady hands. "I am," I said, my voice unshaken. He signed the order, and the sale began. 2 weeks later, movers arrived at 1159 Wisteria Lane, not theirs, the bank's. They had 30 minutes to grab what they could, the rest was auctioned. Neighbors peeked from curtains, Samantha cried on the lawn. My son stood frozen, keys in hand but no door to open. I didn't go. I didn't need to see their faces to know the weight of their loss. Instead, I sat in my apartment, the Texas dusk soft outside, and opened my photo box. There was my son at 10, grinning toothless at the county fair, his arms around me. There he was at graduation, searching for me in the crowd. And there my favorite, him at 26, holding a sign when I passed my driving test at 60. "My mom can drive, so watch out, Texas." I'd laughed until I cried, his pride warming me like summer. I traced the faded ink, my heart aching not for what I'd done, but for the boy he'd been. I didn't hate him. I hated what ingratitude had turned him into, how entitlement had eaten the child who'd once stayed up helping me clean motel rooms when rent was late. I didn't gloat. I printed a single photo and slipped it into an envelope with their names. No note. It showed a foundation being poured outside Amarillo, fresh cement and beams, a sign reading "Future Home of R.M. Talbot, S. 2025. My new house, modest but mine, paid for with the sale proceeds. It wasn't revenge, it was proof that a leech could build roots when left alone. I mailed it, let it speak for me. Back at the pantry, I kept working, handing out meals, learning names, finding strength in the forgotten. Dolores asked once, "You ever lose something big, Miss Ruth?" I smiled faintly. "I lost a house, but I found myself." She nodded, like she understood. I wasn't the woman who'd stood on their porch, grocery bags in hand, hoping for a key. I was the woman who remembered every word, every silence, every dismissal meant to shrink me. They thought they'd won, but I held the deed to my own story now, and no one could lock me out of that. What do you do when you've lost everything but find something stronger, your own truth? I'd given my son my home, my savings, my future to clear his $80,000 debt, only to be locked out and told to just die. I fought back, selling his house, the one I'd saved, with my name on the deed, reclaiming my power. Now at 65, I was starting over in a new home, my own roots growing deep in Texas soil. Would I stay silent, or would my story light a path for others? If this Texas journey's got you hooked, smash that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from. Let's finish this tale together. I moved into my new home outside Amarillo, a modest house with fresh cement and sturdy beams, paid for with the proceeds from selling my son's house. It wasn't grand, no wraparound porch, no fancy fixtures, just a small living room, a kitchen with a single window, and a view of the Texas plains stretching wide under a sky that felt bigger than my past. At 65, I stood on my front step that first morning, coffee warming my hands, the air sharp with the scent of dust and sagebrush. The silence wasn't empty, it was alive like the hum of a hymn I'd forgotten I knew. For the first time in years, I slept through the night, no dreams of locked doors or my son's cruel words, just peace, hard-won and mine. I unpacked slowly, each item a choice, a photo of my son at the county fair, his grin wide and toothless, the crocheted blanket I'd made when money was tight, my folder of documents, the lien confirmation and deed that had changed everything. On a small desk by the window, I set my old recorder, the one I'd used for grocery lists and doctor's notes. It held one file I'd never erase, my son's voice, sharp and cold, "Just die, I don't give a shit." I didn't play it to hurt myself, I played it to remember who I'd been and who I was becoming. I wasn't the woman who'd stood on his porch, grocery bags in hand, locked out. I was Ruth M. Talbot, the woman who'd built this house with her own truth. I started writing, then recording my story for Grandma True Stories, a platform where women like me could speak what's been buried. I sat by my window, the Texas sunset painting the sky red, and spoke. I gave my son everything, my home, my savings, my heart. He called me a leech, told me to die, but I didn't. I remembered who I was and I took back what was mine. If you've ever been pushed out, made to feel small, know this, your silence is power, waiting to speak. I didn't expect anyone to listen, but they did. Comments flooded in from women across quiet kitchens and forgotten rooms. I thought I was alone. You said what I've carried for years. My voice became a thread, weaving a community of mothers, grandmothers, women who'd been told they were too much or not enough. I recorded more, sharing the small moments, the way my son and I laughed over burnt pancakes, the nights I scrubbed motel floors to buy his shoes, the day I walked away from his tears, choosing my dignity over his regret. My days filled with new rhythms. I volunteered at the church pantry, sorting cans, handing out meals to folks like Dolores, who carried her Bible like a shield, and Kenny, whose jokes kept us all afloat. I learned their names, their stories, and found strength in their resilience. I didn't tell them mine, not because I was hiding, but because I was living it. I bought a second-hand piano, played old hymns until my fingers ached and my heart softened. I wrote letters to old friends, not to reopen wounds but to close them gently. I laughed again, not because life was funny, but because I remembered I could. My son called once, his voice stripped of pride. "Mom, I understand now," he said, almost breathless. "I see what I lost. It's too late, isn't it?" I paused, letting the silence breathe. "It's never too late to begin again," I said, gentle but firm, "but I don't pay twice for the same lesson." He cried, and I let him, not to punish but to let him feel the weight of his choices. I hung up, my heart steady, knowing he was finally listening to life, to loss, to the cost of mistaking love for obligation. My home became my sanctuary, a place where no one could lock me out. I planted a small garden, sage and lavender pushing through the hard Texas soil, like me. The photo I'd mailed my son and Samantha of my new house, my new start, said enough without words. I didn't hate them. I loved the boy who'd once made me a sign at 60, cheering my driving test, but I couldn't save the man who'd forgotten that love. I forgave him, not for him but for me, to let go of the ache. I don't know where they are now, maybe rebuilding, maybe still reeling. I don't check. My life is here in the quiet, where the plains stretch wide and the sky holds no grudges. If you've ever been called a burden, been told your love was too much, know this, you're not invisible. Your story has weight, your truth has roots. I'm 65, living in a house I built, speaking words I once swallowed. Share your voice, and let's keep telling the stories they forgot we knew. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment, and let's grow this community, one truth at a time.